Hi, I'm Ravi. I'm a longtime practitioner of the spiritual path, and today I wanted to share some insights about spirituality. So today I'll be talking about the soul, so what it is and why to get in contact with it and how to get in contact with it. So the soul is, in many traditions, including the Sri Aurobindo tradition that I practice, it's the portion of the being that is in direct contact with the divine as kind of an individual piece or emanation um, of the divine that dwells inside the human system. So this is often thought of as the immanent divine, so the divine within the universe, as opposed to the divine that stands outside the universe, which is kind of the transcendent aspect of God that we usually think about as God or the divine outside oneself. So if one is praying to the divine, one often thinks of the divine as this great being outside of oneself that one prays to, whereas the soul is this inmost part of ourselves that is yet in contact with the divine because it is the divine. And when you speak of the idea that every person is in touch with God directly or is God in some sense, that's what this is referring to. The basis of that is the fact that everybody is in touch with the principle of divinity directly because it's kind of installed in your own being. So the soul, we should think of it in contrast maybe to some other parts of the being, because we can easily confuse it with these other important aspects of ourselves. So again, I'll make use of Sri Aurobindo's psychology and constitution of the human. Um, so Sri Aurobindo talks about a couple of different aspects or constituent parts of the human being. So one is the physical body. So we wouldn't confuse the soul for the physical body because it's made of gross matter, and we can't really confuse that with the inmost divine part of ourselves. But some of the other parts of ourselves can get easily confused. So the next level up from the physical body is the vital or the life force. So this is the region where this animating enthusiasm and energetic force of the divine, and also the emotional being of the human being, the human system, come into play. Um, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing because the soul is not itself an emotion, but it works through the emotions. It's kind of like this layer installed, kind of like behind the system of all these constituent parts of matter that kind of uses the different parts of the being, but is not itself a part of that being. So the soul works through the emotions, but is not itself an emotion. Same with the mind. The soul is not the mental capacity or a capacity to make distinctions and arguments and judgments. That's a capacity of the mind that is not identical with the soul, but the soul can work through the mind by suggesting the most inspired thoughts that lead us forward. So, an idea like uh, democracy versus monarchy. This was kind of like an evolution of the soul from believing that we had to be ruled by kings to believing that we would be ruled by the people. So this is a philosophical idea, but it's kind of inspired by this soul movement. So the soul lines up behind the idea of democracy and away from the idea that we're ruled by one kind of all-powerful person with an arbitrary fiat or sense of power. So the soul chooses the mental ideas that are most helpful towards the construction of the world um, that it that it lays out. So there's the physical, the vital, the mental level. Then there's also the level of the supermind, which is a part of Sri Aurobindo's system. It's not so relevant for this video, so I won't go into it here. Um, but yeah, basically the soul uh, is easily confused with contents from the vital, the life force, emotions, and the mind. But the soul is not any of those things. It's this principle that stands behind all of those things and works through those things to shape something that is eventually um, uh, the best representation of the divine. So it's like um, if you're molding a piece of clay, to mold it into a beautiful shape that expresses the divine, you need the soul quality working behind it to mold it that way. So at the same time, even as we're inhabiting these parts of uh, physical and vital and mental in our consciousness, we can reach back and come into contact with the soul quality. And the soul quality is it has many distinctive qualities, but what I find is that there's one kind of dominant vibrational note of the soul, and if you tune into any of these sub vibrations, you can notice those sub vibrations, but still there'll be one dominant main vibration of the soul for each individual soul person. So uh, related aspects of it are love or depth, emotional depth, um, or happiness. Um, Also the feeling of beauty. That's another vibration that has to do with the soul. So all those things kind of combine into one overall soul vibration that you can come into contact with in yourself. So this idea that the soul is kind of this principle that is directly in contact with the divine is really important for this question of how do we decide what to do, or what guides our action, or what is the primary method by which we navigate the world and decide what to do. So in philosophy, there have been thousands of years of wondering, is the mind the highest principle, and what are the principles that can guide the mind towards constructing the best life for itself? And eventually, the conclusion of all philosophy so far, and I'm playing fast and loose, so any philosophers, this is mostly aimed at a spiritual or spiritual philosophy audience. So if you're really passionate about philosophy, forgive me if I'm skipping over a lot. But the so far we have not really been able to find those absolute principles of rationality that let us say that this is the best way to structure our lives so that we can be perfectly rational and guide our lives through rationality. There's always some uh, dependence on emotional factors or kind of ideals that we hold higher than rational justifications, or the idea of human values that are separate from things that can be purely rationally deduced. But if we think about this in a spiritual context, it's not surprising that just the mind by itself would not be able to guide the human being, because the mind isn't necessarily, from the divine's perspective, the most important part of the being. The mind is just one part among many, and it's not the part that is most directly connected to the divine. So this is why in spiritual circles you hear things like, oh, we don't listen to the mind here. You just need to quiet the mind and listen to your intuition. This is where this idea comes from, because it's not the mind that's directly in contact with the divine, but the soul that's directly in contact with the divine. Where this is gets a little bit more subtle is that the soul can still work through the mind, and use the mind for its purposes. So it's not that we don't use the mind or don't listen to the mind, but it's more that the mind is not the master, and the soul is the master of the being, because that's what's directly in contact with the divine. So this idea of values is kind of like the secular version of incorporating the soul back in. So when we speak of valuing human life, there's not a rational deduction that you can say that says that human life is better than tree life, is better than a star, from the kind of scientific perspective that all matter is equal. We kind of put that value into it. And if you look at where that value comes from, um, I really think it fundamentally comes from this sense of the soul, whether you conceive of it in terms of the divine or not the divine. And that goes to another point, that a lot of what I'm saying, I'm using this language of divine, but in practice, the kind of feeling of the soul, the sense of human values, the ways that you can come in contact with the soul and the human values, those can all be actually done without reference to the divine. And it's kind of like a scaffolding that I use because it's a philosophical language that works for me. But you can do all the same practices that I'm going to suggest without reference to any philosophical superstructure, and they'll actually work just the same, and you'll come into contact with probably some of the same psychological experiences. Um, one last point about the soul before I go into some of the benefits. The soul is directly in contact with the principle of ananda, or bliss. Um, and this is because the soul is what stands behind and takes all the value of experience. Um, so the divine, again, in true Aurobindo system, incarnates into the physical world because it wants to have um, the full value of that experience of incarnation. Because otherwise, there's no point to incarnating in a different world instead of just staying unmanifest. You incarnate because you want to have an embodied experience that you cannot have just standing in the ether. And the value of that experience is because it's blissful in some ways. So this isn't just a hedonic aspect of bliss as pure pleasure. If you look at the highest form of any value, whether that be, the highest values of heroism or family or love for a parent and a child, the highest form of any human value is actually the sense of ananda or bliss. Bliss isn't just again, it's not just a sense of physical pleasure, but it's this feeling of uh, heightened depth and heightened blissfulness that comes with the result of any human value taken to its utmost. So that's why the soul is able to stand behind and take value even from things that we don't necessarily recognize in our outer lives as being blissful. The soul can still get that full value of the experience um, from it. And that's why we say the soul learns from all experience. It's kind of extracting the lessons, extracting the ananda from all the different values that we go through in our human experience and sort of reporting back to the divine about what's valuable and how it finds value in all these different things in the world. Um, so why should we come into contact with the soul? Um, because the soul expresses it's kind of this holistic sense of what is most aligned with the best things in the universe. Um, so when you're in touch with the divine directly through the soul, you're in line with what the divine wants to bring about. So you'll be on the path that the divine wants you to be on. And that is also syncing up with the path that the divine wants you to play in the world. That's syncing up the path that the divine wants the world to be on. So that's only good things that are coming out of that. You're in contact with the bliss of your own experience from the ananda that the soul brings. That doesn't mean you're not suffering at all, but it does mean that even suffering you'll be able to see the bliss and the power and the meaning behind that suffering maybe. Um, and everything takes on meaning as a kind of projection of the divine principles. Life is a symbol of the divine, taking you towards the divine. So the soul is not the end of spiritual experience. There might still be the possibility of ascending to the highest levels of nirvana or meditative experience, and that the soul doesn't do by itself. There might be experiences of deep occult planes and worlds and things like that that the soul doesn't take you to directly. But if you're in touch with the soul, everything that you need for your spiritual progress will come in time. So the transformation of the soul is kind of this like initial step that is really beneficial for a spiritual foundation that gets you in touch with the divine and sets your foundation for full alignment with that divine unfolding in the world and in yourself. So that's why Sri Aurobindo recommended this as the initial stage of his yoga. Not that it's just uh, a preparatory stage or anything like that, as it's one of the most important parts of his yoga, getting to this firm and fundamental sense of soul realization or psychic realization in his terms. So now let's discuss 5 ways of getting in touch with the soul at a practical level. So the first way is through art, and this is one of the first ways that I myself experienced the soul. Um, I used to be a really big music fan. I still am a big music fan, maybe not as much as I was in high school. One of the albums that really opened me up to the soul was John Coltrane's "A Love Supreme," which was he's a jazz artist who became very interested in spirituality in the 1960s with the different cultural movements that were getting interested in Eastern religions and things like that. And he recorded this very moving album of spiritual devotion, mixing jazz with kind of the most progressive. It is basically the most progressive form of jazz happening at that time, and he just incorporated a lot of this really passionate, seeking energy into his playing that was intoxicating for me. And I could feel that just listening to that, I wanted to become a better person. I didn't have a notion of spirituality at that point, but I knew that I wanted to aspire to something higher and greater in my life just by listening to that. So you might find this in any form of art. You might find it in the novel. or in painting or in poetry, or in drama, um, because the arts are kind of ways that these different soul aspects are kind of manifested into concrete items that transmit basically levels of human experience from one human to another. It's often difficult to transmit soul experience just through dry philosophy or dry history, or but if you put it in a narrative format or you put it in a format that appeals to the beauty of the colors and the forms of great art, then it's able to directly communicate that soul quality between people. Um, so it's important to note that not all art is going to have the soul quality. Um, so if you're watching, you know, late night sitcoms are not generally going to have the quality that most deeply moves you to the soul, or yeah, very aggressive dance music is not necessarily going to be something that deeply moves the soul. No, that's not to say that it can't be a positive experience or tap into like positive emotions, but it's usually going to be things that are have some sort of spiritual quality. It doesn't mean it has to be religious music necessarily, but it needs to tap into this quality that makes you feel like you want to be uplifted towards something better than life ordinarily is. Otherwise, it could just be referring to any other number of experiences and emotions that are in life that are not necessarily tuned into that highest level of soul. So I'll let you be the judge of what that is, because it's going to be different for everybody and it is subjective. I've had really positive experiences with jazz. So John Coltrane, Kurt Rosenwinkel is another musician that I think is really in touch with the soul. VJ Iyer, I just saw a concert by him that was really got to levels that I thought were deeply moving, in touch with the soul. Um, and yeah, so whatever does that for you in the same way, will hopefully get you to feel that soul vibration, that sense of depth. You want to feel that sense that's it's activating something deep within you that aligns you to this soul vibration. So method number two is heart meditation, and this is the method that Sri Aurobindo and the mother most advised as the most direct method of getting to the soul. So they advise starting in the heart center and just going deeper and deeper in that meditation and going farther to the back of the heart, where they held that the psychic being was. So basically, you just keep going deeper and farther back, and eventually you find something that feels like a cave or maybe a set of doors that go deeper into uh this inner shrine. So it's this kind of inner sanctum where you come directly into contact with the soul and with God. Um, so I've been speaking of the soul as this thing that is this kind of binary quality, but really it's um there are different levels of accessing the soul, and you can come into contact with a slight vibration of it or get more aligned with it. And in my experience, it's more about getting more aligned, a little bit more aligned, a little bit more in the vibration of it, than less in the vibration of it. But the highest level of getting directly into contact with the soul, um, is actually a really high realization that Mira Alfasa, the mother, talked about. And that can take a very long time to get it really this direct contact, this perfect contact with the soul. And she said it could take, 30 years of meditation before you're in that full contact. So I don't mean to suggest that it's um a necessarily just a thing that you're going to be able to do in one day. This is again to get to the full absolute contact with it. That doesn't mean that, just a 30 minutes or 1 hour practice can still be really beneficial, just as you don't need to get to nirvana the first time you meditate. It doesn't mean that your meditation practice isn't beneficial. This is all about getting more aligned with the soul and letting it unfold over time. And in time, you'll come into contact with that full realization. But yeah, the heart meditation is just go deeper and deeper into the heart, into the back of the heart, and find that secret. In Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, he refers to it as the secret cave. There's a beautiful passage about finding this secret cave of the soul. Um, so that's how you would do that. The third way to get in touch with the soul is to do acts of service. Um, so there are different ways you can view this. And I talked about this in the last episode as karma yoga. So sometimes when you're doing karma yoga, you can emphasize the energy aspect of it. So you can feel the energy going out and feel how it's Shakti and how it's accomplishing goals and transforming the world. But there's another aspect of it that you can lay emphasis on, which is how the action or how the work you're doing is serving some other entity or being, and how that is treated as kind of a gift of love towards that entity or being. And that love is what opens the heart towards getting in greater contact with the soul. So in practice, just about every act of work you do is going to have some benefit for some other entity, whether that's a client or a family member or whoever you're doing the work for. It's going to be directed towards some other entity. Even if you're an artist pursuing your own inspirations, you're going to be serving the audience. So you make that art with the intention that the audience be uplifted by whatever you're doing in that artwork. Um, yeah, so if you're at work, you can feel how the work that you're doing is going to benefit the client, how they're going to be appreciative of it, and feel that the energy you're pouring into it is the act of serving that client because the client ultimately stands in for the divine. The client is just another aspect of the divine because they're an embodied soul and they're going to take benefit from what you do. So your work is going to directly benefit them. And then this goes for acts of work, whether it be conventional work, it goes for volunteer work, doing acts that are not compensated that you do maybe for the less fortunate. Those also are acts of service. It can be for people in your family, like helping your cousin out with something or helping your mother out with something that they need done in the house or an errand that they need done outside the home. You're doing an act of service, something that you're pouring energy into that is helping them. And by pouring your own energy into helping another person, you're serving them, you're opening your heart to them, you're giving part of yourself to them. And that's why some people speak of an act of service could be kind of like a love language, a way you express love. So some people might express it through words, and some people might express it through doing these acts of service that are expressions of love. So that's a way of opening one's own heart towards one's own soul. Um, Going on with that theme, a fourth way is the path of relationships or the path of love. So fundamentally, any friendship or love relationship or family relationship at the very base of it is a vibration of caring and love between two people. And eventually, in spiritual practice, we get to a point where you feel that sense of love towards everybody or every being in the universe, ideally. But you don't necessarily have to start with feeling love towards, political figures you don't like or people on the other side of the world. You can just start with the practice of loving those that you are in contact with, that you have a good relationship with, and learning um, to feel that mutual exchange can open the heart. So just asking a friend in sincerity, how are you doing? Is there any way I can help you with what you're working on or what you're going through? That's an act that opens the heart. And then when you feel their mutual response to that, they might send positive energy back to you, and that opens your heart. So that opens you directly towards the soul. And it's that much greater when it's a love relationship or a family relationship or anything like that, that all opens you out to the greater web of love that kind of constitutes the universe. So the one highest form of this in the spiritual practice is the path of bhakti, where the relationship you have is with God. That's the path of devotion. So you're feeling love towards God, feeling God's love towards you, and kind of amplifying that in a circuit until you are completely in that experience. But our human relationships are kind of are grounds for that, and eventually we need to bring that path of bhakti back towards the embodied world and feel that in all our other relationships. So some people go as far as making relationships kind of like a path of spiritual practice, um, uh, learning to kind of care for people and be sensitive to people and um, take other people's needs as your own need. The spiritual teacher Teal Swan talks a lot about this, and I've been enjoying her work for the past year or two. So that's one resource to go to if you're interested in more of this. And as far as the path of bhakti, Sri Aurobindo talks about this in Synthesis of Yoga, which maybe I'll talk about more at a later date. So that was the fourth way of opening the soul. And so last I'll talk about the fifth way of opening the soul to the soul, which is what I call the psychological path. Um, and this is the path I've been working the most with recently. That's and the reason why is because I feel when I do the somatic work of the heart meditation, which is number two, I feel I have some blockages around this kind of somatic work for whatever reason. Yeah, it's I haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet, but I'm still able to contact the psychological qualities of the soul and open up to the soul that way. So the reason why I was even thinking about this video was how last week um, there were just a couple of personal and professional experiences that made me feel, I need to contact the soul because I'm feeling off balance in this way or that way, feeling emotional attachment or emotional stress or different things like that. And I found that I could get back into contact with the soul by feeling the sense of quietude, first of all. So quieting down my mind that's racing with different kinds of thoughts, quieting down the emotions that are going in different directions. So that first quietude lays the basis for the deeper contact you can have with the soul. So after that, you can get in contact with the other aspects of the soul that I was talking about. There's the aspect that is in touch with God. So the feeling of being in connection with God, if you can feel that subtly, how you're already in connection with God, that opens you to the soul. If you can feel this sense of love towards oneself and towards the outer world, if you can feel a sense of this emotional depth, that also feels like you're getting in touch with the soul. Another aspect of it is ananda. So different aspects of it might be easier to feel at different times. And sometimes you might just be able to feel the quietude. It's not always easy to kind of manipulate your experience towards one thing or another, but it's this kind of psychological work of slowly orienting yourself towards this soul vibration. Then you get in greater and greater contact with it, and that kind of stabilizes you and puts you on a more sound footing. That's the kind of work that goes into what Sri Aurobindo talks about as the psychic transformation, where eventually your entire constitution is always being guided by this soul energy and not by the energy of emotional turbulence or stress uh, or clawing emotions in one way or the other. Um, yeah, so the base layer again is quietude, and then you try to align yourself with these other principles of the soul. So it's kind of like if you can remember what one vibration of the soul was from another time you experienced it, then you can kind of call that back up like a saved computer file. If you can reference certain memories that you had of that vibration, you can call it back up. Or if you can kind of conceptually nudge yourself back into that sense. It's not always possible or not always straightforward. Sometimes you might be experiencing something that's so powerful that you can't really adjust your experience, but you can always at least try. And in my experience, you can always at least, at the very least, get to a little bit more quietude than you were in before. So that's the psychological method, kind of aligning oneself to these different vibrations of the soul that constitute this main soul vibration that you have, and eventually over time getting into more and more contact with that so that you eventually have the soul poise all the time, is that's the ideal that we're all trying to reach. Yeah, so I hope that gives you some ideas of how to come into contact with a soul, of why to come into contact with a soul, and just what the soul is and the significance of it for the spiritual path. I hope this was interesting and enlightening. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And yeah, tune in next week for more insights. Thanks for listening.